On behalf of Chief Executive Women, I'd like to acknowledge that we are recording on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land upon which we learn, work, create, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Driving the equality agenda.
Driving the equality agenda.
Driving the equality agenda.
Are we there yet?
Hello, and here we are again on Driving the Equality Agenda, a podcast where I talk to exceptional leaders to help us understand what is holding us back and how we can make better progress towards true gender equality. I'm Anne Burns, and I'm extremely passionate about this topic and how we create a fairer society. And for me and Chief Executive Women, it all starts with women leaders enabling women leaders. Each episode will be exploring skills and knowledge. We're talking cognition, composure, confidence, resilience, and much, much more. So if you're interested and want to be inspired and explore what it takes to be a great leader, you're going to love this. This was a very special conversation with Sam Mostyn. Firstly, I had the opportunity to say thank you for being such an amazing president of Chief Executive Women. And secondly, I got to hear firsthand her thoughts and ambitions as she takes on the lead of the Gender Equality Taskforce. So inspirational to hear her words, and I hope that you enjoy this insight and where she's going to take us in the next decade. Sam, I just want to start by saying thank you. You've been the most incredible president, and I don't have enough words to thank you, but all of us, on behalf of Chief Executive Women, we are very grateful for Sam Mostyn. And as you go forward now with one of your many roles, but I think one of the most important roles, if I can call it that, as the lead for the Gender Equality Taskforce, we're really excited to see what happens next.
Well, thank you. That's incredibly generous from you, Anne. And I'll just start by saying I think every president of CEW would say this, that we are simply the public face of an extraordinary organisation, and the women who have been part of my last 2 years should be thanked as well, because it's been about the collective. So thank you. It's been a real privilege to play this role. And yes, this task force is really important, and I'm really delighted that it shows that the government really understands that we have to be incredibly intentional now about how we achieve gender equality. We've got 13 of us on the task force. We hopefully represent a lot of expertise around the country, but we will go out and be doing a lot of consultations with women right across the country, and ultimately to build a gender equality strategy for the country, make sure that budgets in the future and policies in the future have a gendered responsiveness built into them, and that we understand how to take the jobs and skills event into a white paper on employment that has gender at its centre as well. So there's a lot to do. It's really exciting. The pressure is on, but who wouldn't want to do this at this time in our history?
Yeah, irresistible opportunity for you.
Absolutely.
I was thinking about you and what we would talk about, and I think what is incredible about what you've been able to do, not only have you unified all the voices to a single set of platforms and agenda items within Chief Executive Women, but you've done so in a way which I would describe as a courageous confidence. Tell us about, where does that confidence come from? Were you born with that? Did you develop it? Was that a skill or a strength that you invested in?
Before I answer that specific question, just to your opening remarks, which again are very kind, the wonderful thing about being president is that, again, I represent the members, and we've had this incredible committee system. So we have a policy committee system that deals with policy and advocacy. We've got a great team, policy advisors. And so when I'm out there actually advocating on behalf of CEW, it's where preparation meets opportunity. And that preparation has been all about having a very strong view about what policies we would be advocating. There's nothing messy about it. There's nothing in the moment about it.
Yeah.
It reflects the members and the people we speak to and the other women's organisations that we have partnered with to ensure that when we're out there in the public square advocating, that we're right on our mark about those things. So I just want to pay respect to...
Absolutely. Those women on the team work incredibly hard.
Yeah.
So, Sam, where does that courageous confidence come from?
So I'm going to share with you now some of my history, which will probably start to build a picture of how things happen. So I'm the oldest child in my family. I'm the oldest of 4 girls, now all women, and I grew up in an army family. So I guess oldest kid, so responsible for my sisters, and the oldest, I think, typically gets a bigger share of voice, so I'm told.
I'm a middle, so I definitely know the oldest gets more oxygen than anybody.
And my sisters would probably say that about me too. You also have, being an army brat, as we were known, so part of army families, we were moving a lot as I was growing up. So starting schools, new schools, every couple of years. And so I think when you arrive at a new school in a new state, have to make friends. And so I think having a strong sense of self and being prepared to talk and meet people and leave an impression probably played something to do with that. I was also one of those kind of good kids. Our dad raised us, both our parents raised us with very strong values about service. And I was one of those geeky kids, geeky girls who I was school captain in my primary school, and I was on the school council at high school, and kind of, I guess, something in me that was always interested in finding a place to bring about good change. And so when you take on those roles young, as any other school captains will know, and I like to debate and all that kind of stuff. So I think there were some natural advantages that I had because of my family and my interest. And then over time, I have invested heavily in thinking about where and when do we need to deploy our voices and how to do that well. And I learnt that through years and years, I'm old enough now to say that, of being in executive teams and then sitting on boards. And I've watched a lot of people do this exceptionally well. So a lot of the time I'm looking at the best and seeing how they do it and trying to work out how a woman like me in the roles I've had should have a voice and how to deploy that well. I was also very lucky to work for some people early in my career who were some of the finest communicators. So one of my first jobs was as an associate to Justice Michael Kirby on the Supreme Court of New South Wales.
Incredible.
Yeah, and so I watched him as a communicator of complex legal issues, and he always brought a degree of empathy and personal to those judgments, and to watch him at close range as to how he prepared his judgments, how he met and greeted people, how he gave them a sense of ease and separated out this lofty role as a judge with how he would speak to people generally. I learned a lot about that through Michael. I worked for Paul Keating when he was Prime Minister, and people would say probably a different kind of communicator. So his use of the invective and the in-the-moment kind of attack in the Parliament, to me, was very different to them watching him prepare to deliver really important speeches like the Redfern speech or his speeches about where he thought Australia could go. And then I've watched many other leaders and people I've really admired for a long time, people I've worked alongside, and just watch what actually I think is effective communication and why it works. And often it's just about an incredible amount of authenticity and bringing the personal forward and always grounding it in respect.
Yeah, I love what you've just said about respect. And I think about some of the issues that we put forward as from Chief Executive Women. They were done pre-election with an enormous amount of respect. We're very clear, very concise about what the membership wanted to see and briefed both sides. And I think the core of those messages were delivered with such respect, they almost became irresistible.
We're very lucky to have the Chief Executive Women membership as the grounding, because for me to front that and be able to say, this is what women leaders across the country, influential, powerful women leaders are advocating for, and it's not about what they get out of it. This was a series of policy asks that were about lifting all women across the country. And so I think we started in the right moment. It wasn't about just more leadership for women, although we were certainly calling for the visibility of women leaders and a much more deliberate focus on women as leaders. But we weren't just looking at that to build our own profiles. It was very much alongside other advocates to say the bit of it that our members cared about was the broad range, the broad sweep of policies we believed in that would lift the country. And so I think we had the right policy prescription. And then I've always taken the view that when you're in the market for ideas and you're going to enter that public market, then certainly respectfully, you must do it respectfully. Know who else is in the market doing other parts of the communication. So we are not a shouty organisation. I'm not a shouty person, but I understand the role that activism has from other directions. And so there were younger women, there were protests, there were all sorts of things happening around us. But I wanted to make sure, together with the CW board and the policy team, that our voice was in a respectful, authoritative voice and really did represent our members and was bringing a number of these issues together to say, we're actually interested in the future of the country.
Yes.
And so you've got to deploy yourself in those moments with a storytelling and a way of actually describing what we're asking for and why it benefits so many others, rather than just being self-centred or seeing that as just the domain of leading women.
This is no longer a women's issue. This is about the future of the
right.
country. Very, very powerful in achieving progress. But it's not over yet. So as you take on the Taskforce role, what is your agenda? What is it going to be?
Well, it won't be surprised anyone to know that it's more of the same and then taking it up a few notches. I do think that we're in a remarkable time, and I've always said that great organisations meet moments, and we're in a moment that if we don't meet it, we'll miss an opportunity. So I think CEW will continue to do really well under Sue Lloyd-Hurwitz's presidency, and I'm sure Sue will have her own set of things she'll look at working alongside the policy team and the board and the members, and I can't wait to see what unfolds there, and I'll be a supportive member in that case. What I'm now doing, I guess, outside CW is to look at the big thematics, the big heavy lifting issues that I think are holding us back. And I think no matter what we've done on getting great policy on paid parental leave, on early education and care and the childcare workforce, ensuring that women's gender equality is at the centre of our economy, things like that, I actually think in this country the debate and the conversation we have to enter into is why gender norms hold us back so profoundly. And I think there's some uniquely Australian parts of that story, because we could spend billions in the next decade saying we think we can solve this by releasing women back into the economy through good policies and good investment in childcare and the like. And we can make a fundamental mistake in thinking that will actually happen, and that families will make different choices about who is the carer and who's the worker, or that we don't fundamentally understand why is Australia such a gender-segmented place for work. We still have these very widely held gendered norms in Australia that women care and often do things out of the goodness of their heart, and that men find careers, are primary income earners, and if they are carers, they've softened. And until we address the profound issues of culture for Australia, I think we won't meet that, what gender equality could really mean for everybody in the country. And that takes us into the realm of other forms of diversity, and how if we're gender normed, then we are certainly very culturally normed.
Yes.
And that's why we hear so much about the need for much more intersectionality when we think about First Nations people, about migrant communities, about recently arrived refugees, around those that work alongside us in our organisations who don't come from an Anglo-Saxon background and may have family histories that are very different to those that we often put at the centre of how we think about the country. And so I think that's all at play at the moment. Of course, we've got the lead into a national referendum on the voice, and a voice to Parliament for First Nations people. So these are big social issues that are happening in the moment. And I think, from my perspective, women's voices actually coming to the fore and expressing something on behalf of communities is going to be a really important part of how we achieve greater success for the country, and see some of these things coming to fruition that make us feel better about ourselves, and that we all prosper from that, men, women, all cultures. But it's a big job ahead for everyone involved in this moment.
Nobody better than you, Sam. I mean, it'll take great courage and a great force of nature, but what an exciting prospect. When I reflect back 2 years ago, when those numbers came out of the World Economic Forum saying it was going to take, I think this was pre-COVID, 100 years for us to reach true equality. And now all of a sudden it's 135 after COVID for many of the reasons we understand. But you and I haven't got all that time. I think the next decade is incredibly important. When you think back on your time at CEW, what's been one of your favourite and most proud moments? I've got my favourite from your time as president, but I'm interested. What would be yours? Goodness. Just one. That's just hard. One. That's really hard to do.
Just one. There are so many. And if I put it one, I don't want it to be the favourite necessarily. But I think when we all got to Melbourne for the inaugural Chief Executive Women's Summit on leadership, and first of all, it was just the sense of the people in the room, the several hundreds of predominantly women who were there, members and others by other parts of our network, who wanted to be together in the room after the long, long period of isolation and COVID requirements, to actually be there and to see the infectious nature of both our membership and people more generally, with such a strong desire for a way of thinking about the country's leadership and how we would lead, combine that with the extraordinary work that was done by the team who pulled together that summit. I had almost nothing to do with that. That was an amazing organising committee who put on the stage, I think, the kind of highest level, highest ambition program that was so engaging. It was so forward thinking. It was meeting moments all over the place, and it was not leaving any question unasked, and was leaving the answers then for the audience to say, we need to be better. And there was a moment when one of our speakers actually said to the audience, and it was a line that I've used a lot since, and she said, if you dare to lead, you very much better be prepared to be daring, because if you're not prepared to be daring, how dare you think you can be a leader? And that kind of rhetoric, and that led by women on the stage to actually say, we need to expect more of ourselves, we're going to step into this space. It felt to me that that was the starting point after a long period of the COVID restrictions, where we were sharing something that had huge ambition in it, and was, again, the CW membership and us as a collective group saying, we expect to do more, to be better, to find our better selves, and let's be daring about that.
Can I just stop you there for a second? Because we actually have Kate Gilmore talking about at the summit. Let's have a listen.
She dared imagine that we can still have a future. By the daring use they made of whatever meagre power, post or privilege they had to lead, we know, we've been told, that if we lead with daring for all the reasons they dared imagine, we too can break through, and in that, we will not be alone. But when it's all said and done, it's okay not to be daring. Not everyone has what it takes. But if you know you're not made for daring, please don't dare lead.
See, how incredible was that moment? I had the hair standing up on my skin throughout her presentation, but at that moment when she made us think about what daring leadership looked like and how dare you not aim for that, I was gobsmacked, and that has stayed with me since that moment. I loved
it. She dared us to be daring.
Yeah, that was an electric moment for me. Yeah. But I've got to say there were lots of things in the last 2 years I would reflect on as being favourites. So I'm interested in what your favourite is.
Mine was actually the Press Club in Canberra.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It was just remarkable. You could hear a pin drop. Everybody was watching. We're in the midst of the whole COVID, what do we do, the uncertainty, the ambiguity of that, and the clarity of what you said and how you said it, and that this is our opportunity, let's seize it. And you've just talked about this is the moment. It does feel like a moment.
It's nice that you reflected on it. I probably wouldn't have chosen it as my favourite because it was so much
pressure on you, no doubt.
I'd hate to choose something that was about me.
Yeah.
But that's almost a year ago. It was November 2021. And the thing that really holds that, I think, in its moment is that with a whole lot of people across CW, we conceived of a speech that reoriented the whole discussion. And that's where we first talked about a care economy.
Yes.
And we tested the idea of putting care at the centre of our economy. And we took all the learnings from COVID and about how women knew exactly what had happened through COVID. We'd heard from a number of economists that we'd just lived through the greatest natural experiment that was teaching us about how our economy works. And one of the big lessons was that the economy is held up by women. And they're underpaid, under-respected, undervalued in the caring roles. So the whole show is held up by women, and yet we choose not to pay or respect and expect, back to this gendered norms piece, we expect those women to keep carrying on because they love doing it, or it's in the goodness of their heart, and somehow that's not a respectful career. And so we put into that Press Club speech a call for a new way of thinking about the economy, and we gave the features of it according to a CW set of priorities. And what I'm thrilled about is that much of the language in that speech is now the language of what we're hearing when you hear the Parliament talking about the care economy, or you hear them talking about valuing the care workers. We've just had an announcement from the Fair Work Commission about a 15% pay rise for aged care workers, who are predominantly women. The childcare royal commissions that are going on across the states are saying, why is the early education and care is not paid properly, not respected? They're in full view now. You can't have a childcare policy and investment without paying respect to those workers. And of course, all of this, if we get it right, means that care should be as popular and as respected a profession for men as it is for women. And I'd love to see as many men going into the care professions as encouraging women into the traditionally male professions that are high earning and career driven, because that would tell us that we are getting rid of those gendered norms and that the fields of opportunity are open to men and women alike, and to those that identify as women. Anyone that wants to do what they want to do can do it, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there. But the language of that speech, we're hearing a lot around the place, which says
the echoes. It's gained this momentum. Also in that speech was one of the first times that everybody had heard about the collaboration between men and women, that we can't do this ourselves. This is not just a set of women's issues. This is about economic prosperity for all. And I hear that all over the place in boardrooms, in discussions, in workshops. And indeed, when we often play that speech as part of our Leaders Programme at Chief Executive Women, that is one of the things that the participants really notice, is this idea of collaboration.
Well, absolutely. This should be an entirely collaborative effort. That's why I always try to use the language of respect and never try to say it's anti-men or that women are on some kind of campaigning.
Yeah.
I mean, we are in a campaign mode, and as I said, there are some that have different forms of that. But our message to me at this moment is that we need to do this collectively and respectfully and find our respective roles to do that. There is, though, a role for those of us that have a voice in the public domain to actually call on those that we'd like to see more from.
Yes.
So I would love to see many, many more men stepping up and showing their courage in entering this field and saying that they are feminists, that they believe absolutely that they want to see a change in their own organisations, that they embrace the notion of gender equality and that they can make the economic or financial argument. Because I don't think it should just sit with women to make the case. I think we've been out there encouraging it as a way of thinking about the future, and I'd love to see more men invested in that. But I always come back to making that generous offer to them to come and join us in these moments and to have these conversations together and not assume that this is anti-anybody and that this isn't a zero-sum game for women or for men. It's actually about making the place better for all of us. And so I think it has marked CW. We have, across our membership, almost 1,000 women today working alongside parts of our community, lots of men that they're working with, lots of people across the very diverse population that is Australia. And our members now hold the key to so many opportunities for collaboration. And we saw that in our pre-budget and then pre-election work, that we were standing alongside organisations that it seemed quite odd at the time. So I'm not sure that CW had ever stood beside the ACTU and the BCA and the Parenthood and the Childcare Centre, and Wendy McCarthy standing there as one of the original members of CW and a strong feminist who's driven so much of this over her life. But to see those visuals of who are we collaborating with, who do we want to stand alongside, and can we put aside the things where we're ideologically maybe have differences and look at the things that unite us. And in those moments, we've seen that we've actually been able to find the messages and things that we all care about, and we've had unanimity on that, and our voices have been so much stronger as a result of those collaborative moments. Big shout out to a number of the women who helped bring those together. So the Nicola Forrest, for example, is a quiet operator behind the scenes, but she created Women for Progress through Minderoo to bring a very diverse group of women together behind the scenes to say, what could we agree to say together, but also in our independent roles, that then the chorus that the public hears is one of very similar messages that gives people confidence that this isn't just a women's movement, or this isn't just about the union movement or big business. It's actually reflected in the language and the words and the advocacy of so many people that it becomes the norm. And I think that's what we saw in the lead up to the election. There was just a natural set of things that happened. And of course, women as voters made certain decisions. We saw the rise of women independents into the parliament. And then we see a Prime Minister come to our, a few weeks after, or a month or so after being elected, saying to our wonderful summit in Melbourne, he wanted to thank the feminists across the country for changing the country. Quite extraordinary moments.
Yes, absolutely.
But he wasn't signalling us out. He was just saying all of that work together mattered, and it created a momentum for change that gave confidence to government that they could put gender equality at the centre of the economy.
Sam, you talked about where preparation meets opportunity. How do you prepare?
I've learnt a lot in the last decade, particularly about preparation being as much about what you don't know as what you think you do know. I think one of the traps of leadership is that you get further and further away from the lived experience of people if you're like me, you actually would like to think that your work is assisting. And so today what I do with all of my preparation and my presentations, and when I think about being out in the public square about what I think we need to do, I go and check ahead of time the things I'm not as close to. I've learnt most recently from one of our members of the Taskforce, Therese Edwards, what it really means to be a single mum in this country today.
Right.
And I have no lived experience of being a single mother on benefits in this country today. I didn't know enough about the sole parent payments and what that had meant for those women's ability to leave violent relationships. So I go and find out and sit with those women, and I just want to listen and learn so that when I'm then out and have a voice and have this remarkable and unique and privileged opportunity to speak, that I don't just speak on my behalf and my experience, that I can hear in the back of my mind, back to that chorus, the chorus of women's lived experiences that I'm really bound to be able to represent. I can't be them, but I can't let them out of my mind when I'm thinking about what it is we're trying to do with these broader reforms and changes. So it's just a bit of advice, I guess, is to think about when you're making big statements about what needs to change, whose stories don't you know? Who would you benefit from going and listening to and putting yourself at some vulnerability and some risk of being, not knowing as much as we typically do as women leaders. We typically do know what we're doing, but sometimes I think it's worth that pause of, could I learn a bit more? Could I go and listen? And I do that quite a lot nowadays, and maybe that's the benefit of age and not being quite as confident about my own ability to know everything. Yeah. And I think that's something that I'll carry forward into the work that we do in future.
It's definitely an art, isn't it? The art of communication actually is listening, particularly when you're speaking on behalf of others.
Absolutely.
So what about when you're actually speaking to people who don't like you? We spend a lot of time talking with women leaders about how do you overcome that. What are your thoughts about that? Does that also come with age, Sam?
Well, I think when I was younger, I probably would have dealt with that with a bit more force and a bit more anger probably, and I think probably less actually decent outcomes, because once you're in the contest of ideas, if you're agitated and it's a fight, you don't convince anybody. You might feel good about it yourself, but and I've been in those moments, and there have been moments in my career where I've had to actually say things in a moment with strength and try to produce some outcomes. But I found nowadays that if I meet that opposition and that counter view with deep respect and make sure my voice is respectful, make sure what I say engages with that other view, that's a far better way of bringing about change. And so it does mean, though, I stick my neck out a lot, and it does mean that I'm often dealing with those moments where someone who vehemently disagrees with me or has a real concern about what I'm saying needs to be heard. And I think you've got to open up that space for that conversation, because change is about bringing lots of different views, lots of diverse views together, to be confident about the change you're making and that it can have impact and that they benefit as much as you. And I think there is an art to that, and I think it starts in respect and having a little bit of courage that says, I don't mind if you don't like me as I say this, I don't mind if you want to challenge my views, but I want to have that engagement that says we respect each other for the right to do that.
Yeah, the power comes from the dialogue.
That's right. And I think far too often we think that it's just a single way, a single piece of transmission of a message and hope for the best and hope it lands somewhere. Far more interesting when you're with someone who does disagree and pushes you. And it actually hones the argument in a way that says, how am I going to convince someone who doesn't agree with me? Because I can speak to lots of great audiences of women who are on this trail and are cheering. And it's a wonderful environment to be in. It's incredibly soulful and it builds us all up. It's a different proposition to stand in front of an audience where you know there's a degree of scepticism or anger or just disapproval. And so how to bring that audience with you, I think, is a different set of skills, and it does start. Respect.
Absolutely.
Arguing the case, responding to the questions, and I think bringing forth our own that's when the authenticity comes. I can see your point. I understand that. I often say I'd like to convince my father of some of the things I'm saying because we have such different views. But I respect him so deeply because he raised me, and he's such a generous man. But he has a more conservative view of the world than I do. And so when I sit with him, I'm not going to yell and scream and say I'm right. We've got to find an accommodation where he says, okay, I will give you that. I understand that. I may not be quite there yet, but thank you for listening to me and understanding where I'm coming from. And I think, we've got a lot of big issues to deal with in this country in the coming years. And the more we can do that and not put labels on each other, not assume something about the other, and enter into that conversation with respect and decency and show the dignity that a good conversation can have, then we can achieve things together.
Sam, it's always fascinating to talk to you. We always ask our guests for one piece of advice as you think about the bigger picture, as you move forward into your new role, one of many roles that you have, but as you move forward into the Taskforce role. What is your advice to women leaders around courageous confidence and collaborative communication? One for the road, if you like.
I guess for me it would come, I'm always reluctant to give specific advice because I think, I don't know who's listening and where we find our audience, but I would say one of the most important things to do is work out who you are, what you care about, and how do you bring forth your authentic self in the things you want to most change and the things you want to have a role in. And for women leaders, we've often been criticised for our authenticity because there's almost been historically a bit of a cookie-cutter model of what leadership looks like. And I think our members and women leaders generally bring such an exciting new form of leadership which is grounded in bringing who we are and what we care about and not being frightened of that, sharing some of our own stories and some of our own experience in deploying the voice for the things that we care about. And we will all care about very different things. So I think for all the women and everyone listening, it's working out what does matter to you. Where do you want to spend your time and your reputation and your agency expressing that voice and helping to move the things that you really care about. And in doing that, some women would say, look, public speaking's not for me, or I could never do a podcast. And I'd say to those women, one of the things we know through CEW, through the leadership program, the Connect program, is that we all do have a voice. And sometimes it might mean going and spending some time with a bit of expertise to teach you how to raise your voice and find your voice, even if that voice starts around a board table or around a management table or a family table, that actually you can learn a lot. There are a lot of technical things you can learn about finding your voice. And I think women, I don't want to be too general about this, but men jump into the public sphere a lot, sometimes with not huge amounts to say, but they know their voices matter and they find them. Women hold back and almost think it's a skill for someone else or it's a job for someone else. And I think we have such important stories, such wonderful voices. And if anyone's nervous about that, skill up. Go and talk to the people we often bring into the leadership course around those women that can actually show you what you look like on a playback and play your voice back to you so you listen to it and think, right, I can learn that skill. And then don't be too hard on yourself. Go out and play a bit and find out where your voice matters. And from that, things really do grow. And back to the chorus, we need as many people out in the public domain talking about the things that matter to them, bringing their experiences to bear on issues. We can't leave it to those in big policy jobs or those that have always held the microphones. Our voices really matter. So I'd encourage people listening to find your voice, back yourself into expressing your voice, and just let this take you where it might. I think it's enormously rewarding for women to find their voices, and change does happen as a result.
Fantastic. We are so grateful for you, Sam. We wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Anne.
And we look forward to collaboration in the future. We hope to make you proud. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
It's been wonderful chatting to you, and thank you for all you're doing right across our cohort. And this podcast is just a great example of meeting a moment. So
thank you
really, really delighted to join you today.
You've been listening to Driving the Equality Agenda, a podcast brought to you by Chief Executive Women. If you're interested in inquiring about our great Leaders Programme, please connect with us on cw.org.au. If you need more information about this episode, please refer to the show notes. And don't forget, use the hashtag Driving the Equality Agenda and follow us so that you don't miss a single episode on this great adventure. A quick shout out to our fabulous producer, Sarah Linton from Cobox. She always does a great job with her and her team, and I just wanted to especially recognise all of her help and support. Thank you for listening.